He did. He's been going back and forth, essentially. President Trump has, going from saying that he was open to sending Tomahawks to then throwing a bit of cold water on it yesterday. Today, again, saying that he doesn't really want to have to send Tomahawks if the U.S. doesn't have to, that he's worried about depleting the weapons stockpile of the U.S., and that if they can come to an agreement without having to send Tomahawks, that's what President Trump would like to do. But President Zelensky, again, repeating that the very important things to him, to Ukraine, to try to make sure that Putin comes to the table for a ceasefire. He said the very important elements are weapons, and that includes Tomahawks, are, becoming a part of NATO, as well as security guarantees with the United States.
All right, Max, if he does that, if he does give Tomahawks either directly or indirectly to Ukraine, what might it mean for this war?
Well, obviously, it would be another important factor on Ukraine's side, which would allow Ukraine to hit many more Russian oil refineries and other facilities and to increase the cost of Putin of continuing the war. But from listening to President Trump speak just now, I didn't see any indication that he was actually going to give the Tomahawks. I mean, he can always, do a reversal, but it sounded like Putin has bought himself some time with his call yesterday to Trump. And this is part of a pattern that we have seen. It happened in August where Trump was threatening sanctions on Russia, and Putin reaches out. They have a summit in Alaska, and all of a sudden there's no more talk about sanctions on Russia. And now Trump has been talking about Tomahawks for Ukraine. Putin calls yesterday, and all of a sudden now there's going to be another Trump-Putin meeting. Goodness knows why. And I would suspect that Trump is probably not going to give Tomahawks to Ukraine right now. So I would say that Putin's charm offensive and his strategy of stalling U.S. support for Ukraine seems to be working.
What would the point of another meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin be? This one, it appears, might happen in Budapest. Rick?
Well, it's hard to say, Katie. I mean, the performative aspect of the job seems to be Trump's principal motivation, even more than settling disagreements. And he likes being the cynosure on the world stage. I think Max explained it well, that Putin continues to manipulate him. Trump talking about Tomahawks was a way of establishing some leverage, which it obviously did. It caused Putin to call him. But then to give away your leverage by saying you're not going to do it anymore, it doesn't seem to be like very good negotiation. So it may just be much ado about nothing, just the way the Alaska meeting was.
All right. There's also some diplomatic stuff here. He mentioned India, Rick, and he said pretty surely that India is not going to be buying any of Russia's oil. He's already tried to tariff India into stopping that purchase. Is there an indication that India will stop? And if India did stop buying Russian oil, what sort of pressure does that put on Vladimir Putin?
Well, Katie, the Indians have been very circumspect in their response to that. They have said that they haven't said anything about stopping buying Russian oil. It seems to me, if I'm a diplomat reading the tea leaves, they have no intention of stopping buying Russian oil, but maybe not talk very much about it. And by the way, India also has said that Donald Trump didn't settle a war between India and Pakistan. They're also very circumspect about that as well. And, part of the reason that Russia has been effective is that they've been able to sell their oil to India and China, and they've kept their profits coming in. That's why Putin so doesn't want American sanctions, and why they had that summit in Alaska, and Putin avoided getting American sanctions, and that's what he's trying to avoid again now.
Let me play Donald Trump saying what he believes Vladimir Putin wants.
I think that President Putin wants to end the war, or I wouldn't be talking this way. I think he wants to end the war. I spoke to him yesterday for 2.5 hours. We went through a lot of details. He wants to get it ended. I think that President Zelensky wants to get it ended. Now we have to get it done.
Sidelines and go into the arena. My panelists here, along with CNN's senior White House correspondent, Kristen Holmes. Kristen, let's kick it off with you. We saw Zelensky just a moment ago leave the White House. What are you hearing about how those talks went today?
Well, we're still trying to get some answers here. We know that it seems unlikely that he's going to get what he came here for. On Sunday of last week, President Trump was almost threatening Putin that he was going to give these Tomahawk missiles to Zelensky. But after their 2-hour phone call between Trump and Putin, it seems less and less likely. President Trump was asked a number of times directly whether or not he was going to give those long-range missiles to Ukraine, and he danced around the topic. He said he hoped the war would end without using those missiles. At one point, he said that the U.S. needed those missiles as well. And he had told me the day before that, of course, Russian President Vladimir Putin asked not to give those Tomahawk missiles over. So it appears that was part of their conversation as well. Now, when it came to this meeting in Hungary, here's what President Trump had to say.
I would say most likely it's going to be a double meeting. It'll be a double meeting, but we will have the President, Zelensky, in touch. There's a lot of bad blood with the two presidents, and I'm not speaking out of turn when I say it. It's a very difficult situation.
So he says double meeting there. It appears that he's talking about a bilateral meeting with just him and Russian President Vladimir Putin, but instead, of course, used the term double meeting, which is not one we hear very often, led to some confusion. But one thing to note here is that if it is just in fact what we believe it to be, which is Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Trump, what makes this any different than the meeting that we saw in Alaska? And President Trump tried to say that Alaska set the groundwork for this meeting. But remember what he wanted out of Alaska. He wanted a ceasefire, and if not a ceasefire, a sit down between Zelensky and Putin, neither of which happened. And when he continued to say over and over again that he believed Putin wanted peace and an end to the war, when he was asked why he believes that now, he couldn't really answer the question. And in fact, at one point, he admitted that perhaps he was being strung along by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
All right, Kristen Holmes, live for us from the White House. Thanks so much. And let's go now to CNN Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Matthew Chance in Moscow. Matthew, I know Moscow is watching this meeting very closely. How is the Kremlin reacting?
Yeah, they're watching it very closely, undoubtedly, but they're not reacting to it in public. Privately, though, I suspect they've been watching these events unfold, watching this performance in front of the media in the White House with a degree of satisfaction. Look, President Trump made it pretty clear that Zelensky was not going to walk out of this meeting with Tomahawk cruise missiles. And for the most part, that's one of the reasons why President Putin staged what was effectively a 2.5-hour intervention last night, calling President Trump, basically explaining to him from the Russian point of view that cruise missiles, Tomahawks, would not have a major effect on the battlefield, but they would be seen as an escalation. They would damage the relationship between Washington and Moscow, something that they know President Trump cares a great deal about. And so there's that aspect they'll be pleased with. I think they'll also be pretty satisfied with the idea that Trump seems very sure indeed that President Putin wants a deal, wants to end the war, wants to talk about peace, kind of holding out the prospect of a peace agreement or engagement about peace has proved to be a very effective strategy for the Kremlin in the past. It means that they can essentially delay increased US military action support of Ukraine, supplies of weapons and things like that. And so I think they're pretty happy with it. But as Kristen was saying, it's very difficult to see what has changed in this, what will have changed in the meeting that's coming up in 2 weeks or so from now in Budapest, that summit between Trump and Putin. From the summit in August in Alaska, I was in that room. I saw how President Trump rolled out the red carpet for Putin and got virtually nothing in return. There's been a few things changed. The military pressure on the battlefield on Russia has been stepped up. The economic pressure has increased perhaps a little bit as well. But publicly, at least, Putin has made no suggestion that he's prepared to compromise on his core military objectives. And so there's a real possibility that nothing's changed at all, and we'll be back where we were back in August at the end of the Budapest summit.
All right, we're going to dive into that a little bit further. Matthew Chance, thank you so much. I want to bring in former NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Wes Clark. And Ambassador Richard Haass, he served in the George W. Bush administration. And also, I want to put on the left side of your screen, you'll see our Arena text chain. That's where we're sharing additional analysis from a few of our top reporters and contributors. General Clark, I want to just pick up what we were just talking about, and that is this upcoming meeting at some point in the future between President Trump and President Putin. As noted, after the meeting in Alaska, you only saw more aggression from Russia and Ukraine. What could come out of this potential meeting in Budapest?
I don't think much is likely to come out of it. I think it's part of the threefold strategy that Mr. Putin has, which is attack on the ground, demoralize Ukraine through deep strikes and the population, and then use diplomacy to stall assistance to Ukraine. Here, he's doing it right here on the Tomahawk missiles, and buy time for his military to work. But Pamela, the real issue is this: if President Putin stops the war, wants to stop the war, just stop the war. All he has to do is stop. He's the one who's refused a ceasefire. This is not like Israel and Hamas. This is much different. This is a war of choice undertaken by Mr. Putin. He could stop it at any time. Now, would Ukraine be willing to concede the permanent occupation of those territories? That's a legal issue and a political issue. But it's not a military issue. All Putin has to do is stop.
Seems to me that while Trump does sound different with regard to Ukraine and Russia, he does sound more critical of Putin than he used to be, a bit more supportive of Ukraine than he used to be. I think there's a couple things happening there. One, he's a bit embarrassed by the fact that his buddy Vlad has sort of thumbed his nose at him, continues to say things about him and not actually work towards a ceasefire. I do think, and I've talked about this like a dozen times since then, but Zelensky exposing Trump and Vance and Rubio in that public meeting, insisting the meeting be public, basically allowing Trump to leak out his insanity to the world. And that woke everybody up to how crazy this term was going to be, because that was really one of the first crazy things that happened during this Trump term. Right? It was crazy from day one, obviously, but that meeting with Zelensky, did you even say thank you? That with the way Vance acted and he acted was really like an alarm going off for the world. Like, oh yeah, this is going to be madness. Way worse than Trump 16, Trump 17 to 2021, right? Like we understand that moment, but I just feel like he's never going to fully go at Vlad because there's just so many vectors of blackmail. There are alleged tapes out there. I can't even mention the tapes. They're that yucky. But I guarantee you, if you read the comments right now, people will tell you what kind of tapes they are. Folks, leave a comment on it. Maybe people will have a nice reading session. But even on everything like money and stuff, there's still these generation-long dependence on Russia from Trump. And you can say, oh, maybe these things have closed down, but you never know for sure. Remember what one of his sons said, famously, we get all the money we need from Russia. Now, I don't know if they get money from Russia anymore. They might not. But the details of that money and how it was gotten, did we ever really get a full, honest detailing? All I know is that Putin has more dirt on Trump than Trump has on Putin. I'm sure Putin has a lot of dirt, but Putin's also, people know who he is. He's a known quantity, and he is a more firmly established dictator than Donald. Donald wants to be like Putin. He doesn't have the dictatorial power Putin does. He would like to, but he does not yet at least have it. And so, blackmail about dirt hurts one way more than the other. So Donald does sound different, but he's tacoed before, and I think he might taco again.